On April 6th, India turned on a different kind of nuclear reactor. This reactor makes more fuel than it consumes while it's running. It is literally manufacturing its own fuel. And here's the part that should make every Indian pay attention. The fuel it runs on, India has so much of it sitting in the ground that it could power the entire country for 60,000 years. But before we get to that number, we need to talk about why electricity in India is as expensive as it is. Because that's what this reactor is really about. Right now, roughly 70% of India's electricity comes from coal, and not even Indian coal. A large chunk of it is imported, mostly from Indonesia. Last year, India imported roughly $25 billion worth of coal. Most of that was thermal coal to keep our lights on. The reactor we just turned on is the first step in making that $25 billion dependence reduce from our trade deficit forever. Every time your electricity bill goes up, part of the reason is that global coal prices move. Now, estimates suggest that electricity from thorium-based reactors could eventually cost lower than as 3 rupees 50 paise per unit. Compare that to the 8 to 12 per unit that most Indian households pay today for coal-based power. That gap is not just a cheaper bill. It means cheaper manufacturing, agriculture, data centers, everything. But the real game changer isn't even the price. It's the fact that the fuel is ours. Nobody can sanction it. Nobody can embargo it. No global commodity shock touches it. India digs it out of the ground in Kerala and Odisha and puts it in the reactor. That's it. That fuel is called thorium. And the reactor India just turned on is the bridge that gets us there. But to understand how this bridge works, you need to understand something about uranium first. When you dig uranium out of the ground, you don't get one thing. You get a mixture of 2 types of uranium that are almost identical. Same element, same name, but completely different behavior. Uranium-235 is the useful one. Fire a neutron at it, it splits. That split releases a huge amount of energy, releases more neutrons, those neutrons split more atoms, you get a chain reaction. That's what powers every nuclear plant in the world. That's also what goes inside a nuclear bomb. The problem is when you mine uranium from the Earth, only 0.7% of it is U-235, less than 1%. The other 99.3% is its brother, uranium-238. And U-238, in a normal reactor, does almost nothing useful. Neutrons bounce off it. It just sits there. You mine a mountain, you use a pebble. The rest is waste. This is why uranium-importing countries are stuck in a bad position. You pay to mine it, pay to enrich it, which is a whole separate expensive industrial process to concentrate that 0.7%, and you're still using less than 1% of what you started with. Now here's where it gets interesting. What if instead of slowing neutrons down, you kept them fast? In every conventional nuclear plant, water is used as the coolant. Water does 2 things. It carries heat away from the reactor core, which is what you want, but it also slows neutrons down. And slow neutrons are great for splitting U-235, but they're completely useless for doing anything with U-238. But fast neutrons, the kind you get when you don't slow them down with water, do something remarkable to U-238. Instead of bouncing off it, they get absorbed. And when U-238 absorbs a fast neutron, it transforms. It goes through a series of radioactive changes and comes out the other side as plutonium-239. Plutonium-239 barely exists in nature. We make it. And here's the thing. It's actually better reactor fuel than U-235. It splits more easily, releases more energy per reaction. So imagine a reactor where the core is running on plutonium-239, generating electricity, while simultaneously firing fast neutrons into a surrounding layer of U-238, converting that U-238 into more plutonium-239. The reactor is generating power and manufacturing its own fuel at the same time. That's a fast breeder reactor. Fast means the neutrons are fast. Breeder means it produces more fuel than it burns. And that same process, firing fast neutrons into material, is also how you eventually get to thorium. Place thorium in the reactor alongside U-238, the fast neutrons hit it, and thorium converts into uranium-233, which is the fuel for stage 3, India's endgame. The breeder reactor is the machine that manufactures the fuel for the next phase. This is what India's PFBR at Kalpakkam just became capable of. This is what achieving criticality means. The chain reaction is now self-sustaining. Now, that sounds like the most important energy story in the world right now. So why haven't you heard about it? Because India didn't invent this. And the countries that did invent it stopped. And the reason they stopped is one of the most dramatic and expensive failures in the history of energy. Here's something India's nuclear establishment doesn't shout about. The fast breeder reactor concept is not new. It's not cutting edge. It's not something Indian scientists discovered. France had a working fast breeder reactor in 1973. The United States ran experimental fast reactors for decades before that. The UK, Germany, Japan, all of them built and operated fast breeder reactors before India did. France even built a massive commercial one called Super Phoenix, a 1,240 megawatt fast breeder that was the largest ever built. It actually connected to the grid and fed electricity into French homes. So the real question is, why did every single one of those countries stop? And why did India keep going? The answer is, you cannot cool a fast breeder reactor with water. And the thing they replaced water with is one of the most dangerous substances you can keep inside a building. Remember, water slows neutrons down. The solution engineers landed on was liquid sodium. Sodium is a metal. At room temperature, it's a solid, the same element in your table salt. But sodium has two properties that keep nuclear engineers awake at night. One, it explodes violently on contact with water. Two, it catches fire when exposed to air. Japan built a fast breeder reactor called Manju in the 1990s. In 1995, a pipe cracked. Sodium leaked. It hit the air and caught fire. The accident caused serious damage. Manju was shut down. Then, in 2010, when Japan finally tried to restart it, a 3.3-ton piece of equipment fell into the reactor vessel during maintenance. The reactor sat idle for almost its entire existence. Japan spent billions. Manju was decommissioned in 2016, having generated almost no usable electricity. Japan wasn't alone. The US canceled its program after spending over $15 billion. Collectively, the West spent close to $50 billion on this technology without getting sustained commercial power out of it. But the technical problems weren't the only reason they stopped. In France, the Super Phoenix faced something even harder to solve than a sodium leak: public rage. And this rage was specifically aimed at fast breeders, not just nuclear in general. Why? Because fast breeders run on plutonium. And in the public's mind, plutonium means one thing: nuclear weapons. People weren't just afraid of a meltdown, they were afraid that a country running a plutonium economy was one step away from building more bombs. Anti-nuclear groups organized across France, Switzerland, and Germany specifically against the Super Phoenix. Tens of thousands marched. Lawsuits were filed. The reactor became a political liability. Then, in 1986, Chernobyl happened. A conventional Soviet reactor, not a fast breeder, exploded and sent radioactive fallout across Europe. It had nothing technically to do with fast breeders, but it didn't matter. The public's fear of anything nuclear went to a completely different level overnight. Governments that had been defending fast breeder programs suddenly had no political room left to keep spending billions on something most voters wanted shut down. And then, almost perfectly timed, global uranium prices crashed in the 1980s. Suddenly, uranium was cheap and abundant on international markets. The entire economic argument for building a complicated, expensive, sodium-cooled fast breeder reactor disappeared. Why keep spending when cheap uranium is right there? So they stopped. Every single one of them, except Russia. And Russia kept going for the same reason India did. They had their own strategic reasons to not depend on imported fuel. India watched all of this happen, and it kept building anyway. Not out of stubbornness, out of necessity. Because India had a problem that cheap uranium could never fix. India barely has any uranium of its own. What it does have, it was blocked from buying on international markets for decades because of its nuclear weapons program. For India, there was never a moment where cheap uranium made fast breeders feel unnecessary. The whole premise, we need a reactor that stretches our fuel supply and eventually uses thorium, was never optional. It was the plan from the start.